Is this some kind of joke? Sir, you can't loiter here. This area is for patients with scheduled appointments. The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of impatient authority that comes from a new uniform and a little bit of power. It sliced through the low hum of the VA hospital lobby, turning heads. The old man didn't flinch. He sat on the hard plastic chair, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. He wore a faded olive jacket, the kind that had seen too many winters, and trousers that were clean but worn thin at the seams. His face was a road map of 80-odd years, but his eyes, a pale, clear blue, were steady. They held a stillness that was unnerving. He looked at the young security officer standing over him, a man half his age and twice his size, whose name tag read Brody. "I'm just waiting," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, like stones tumbling in a slow river. Officer Brody scoffed, planting his hands on his hips. "Waiting for what, Grandpa? A handout? The shelter doesn't open for another 3 hours. You know the rules. We've had this conversation before." He was playing to the small audience that was now gathering, a few veterans waiting for their own appointments, a couple of nurses on their break. He wanted to look effective, in control. The old man simply shook his head slightly. Not waiting for that. He clutched a small, worn leather pouch that sat in his lap. It was dark with age, its surface cracked and smooth from decades of handling. It looked like an old-fashioned shaving kit, maybe, or a tool pouch. To Brody, it just looked like more junk. "Look, I don't have time for games," Brody said, his voice rising. He gestured expansively around the sterile white lobby. "This is a place for heroes, for soldiers who served. It's not a bus station for people like you. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time, nicely. Please collect your things and leave." A young nurse with kind eyes, her name tag reading Diaz, stepped forward. "Officer, is there a problem? Maybe I can help him find where he needs to go." Brody waved her away dismissively. "I've got it handled, nurse. This man is trespassing." He turned his focus back to the old man, his condescension thickening. "Are you deaf, old-timer, or just stubborn? Let's go." He reached down and grabbed the old man's arm. The touch was firm, insistent, and in that instant, the world shifted for Samuel Finch. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital lobby, the rubbing alcohol, the floor cleaner fused with the pressure on his arm. The low murmur of the crowd became a distant roar, like incoming artillery. The polished linoleum floor dissolved into the sucking mud of a jungle floor in a monsoon. He wasn't in a hospital lobby anymore. He was 23 years old, crouched in a foxhole somewhere deep in a country no one back home could find on a map. Rain, thick and warm, plastered his hair to his forehead. The air was electric, with the snap and crack of rifle fire. A boy, no older than 19, was lying beside him, his leg torn open, his face pale with shock. The boy was screaming, a high, thin sound that was being swallowed by the chaos. "Doc! Doc, get over here! We got a bleeder!" Young Samuel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his kit, not a standard-issue one, but a custom leather pouch his father, a country doctor, had helped him design, and scrambled over the slick mud. Bullets kicked up dirt around him. He didn't see them. He only saw the kid. His hands, young and steady then, moved with a practiced, almost supernatural speed. He ignored the morphine. No time. He packed the wound, his fingers finding the artery, applying pressure with a strength born of pure adrenaline. "Stay with me, son," he had whispered, his own voice lost in the din of battle. "Just stay with me, I got you." "Hey, I'm talking to you." Brody's voice yanked him back to the present. The guard was shaking his arm now, his face red with frustration. "What's in the bag, huh? You protecting it like it's gold." Before the old man could react, Brody snatched the leather pouch from his lap. The drawstring came loose, and a few strange, antique-looking medical instruments spilled onto the floor with a soft clatter. a set of silver hemostats, a bone-handled scalpel, a roll of silk suture thread yellowed with age. The crowd gasped. Brody stared at the objects, confused. "What is this? Are you some kind of quack doctor?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "This is hospital property, isn't it? You probably stole it." Samuel didn't say a word. He simply bent down, his old joints protesting, and began to slowly, carefully pick up his scattered tools. His hands, now gnarled with age and mapped with the fine lines of 1,000 repairs, moved with the same deliberate grace they had possessed 60 years ago in that muddy foxhole. Each tool was an extension of himself, a piece of his soul. Nurse Diaz knelt to help him, her expression a mixture of pity and outrage. "Officer, that's enough," she said, her voice sharp. "You've made your point. You're harassing him." "I'm doing my job," Brody shot back, puffing out his chest. "I'm maintaining order. This man is a nuisance and a potential thief." It was then that a hush fell over the lobby. It started at the main entrance and spread like a wave. Conversations stopped. People stood a little straighter. The source of the silence was a group of men in immaculate Class A uniforms, their chests adorned with ribbons. They walked with an air of purpose that commanded respect. At their lead was a man with 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder of his jacket. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and a gaze that missed nothing. General Wallace. He was in town for a dedication ceremony, and his presence turned the bustling lobby into a silent hall of reverence. The general's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a practiced glance. He saw the crowd, the flustered nurse, the belligerent security guard, and the old man on his knees picking up his tools. His eyes narrowed slightly. He started walking toward the commotion, his polished shoes clicking softly on the floor, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Brody, seeing the approaching brass, saw his chance to impress. He straightened up, puffing his chest out even further. "General, sir. Nothing to worry about. Just handling a vagrant causing a disturbance." General Wallace didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the old man. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze locked on the worn leather pouch, then on a small faded tattoo barely visible on the old man's wrist as his sleeve slid back. A coiled serpent with a medical caduceus entwined around it. The general's stern expression dissolved, replaced by something else entirely. Awe, disbelief, and a profound, soul-deep respect. The 4-star general took another step forward, his movements slow, almost hesitant, as if approaching a holy site. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried across the cavernous lobby, each word filled with a weight that stunned the onlookers. "Sergeant Finch?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Samuel Finch, is that really you?" The old man, Samuel, looked up from the floor, a silver hemostat clutched in his hand. His clear blue eyes met the general's. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, 2 soldiers bridging a gap of 60 years in a single glance. A slow, faint smile touched Samuel's lips. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "It's been a long time, sir," he whispered. General Wallace's composure broke for a fraction of a second. He visibly swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He then turned his head slowly, deliberately to face Officer Brody. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was more terrifying than any shouting could ever be. "Officer," the general said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature, "do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" Brody was dumbfounded. He looked from the powerful general to the homeless old man and back again. "Sir, he's a transient. He has no appointment. He was—" "This man," General Wallace interrupted, his voice ringing with an authority that vibrated through the floor, "doesn't need an appointment. This entire building, every brick and every stone, stands on the shoulders of men like him. You are standing in the presence of a living legend. The lobby was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The general took a step closer to Samuel, bending down not as a superior but as a subordinate. He reached out and gently took the old leather pouch, handling it as if it were a sacred relic. "I've only ever heard stories about this kid," he said, his voice filled with reverence. He looked at the crowd, at Nurse Diaz, at the stunned Officer Brody. "None of you would know his name. It's not in the history books. His file is buried under so many layers of black ink and classification it might as well not exist. He never received a Medal of Honor in a public ceremony. He was never celebrated on the front page of a newspaper. Men like him didn't serve for the glory. They served in the shadows doing the impossible so that others could live to see the sunrise." He straightened up, holding the pouch. "This is Sergeant Samuel Finch. To the handful of men who survived the operations he was on, men who owe him their lives, their limbs, their sanity. They didn't call him Sergeant. They called him the Guardian Med." A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The name was a whisper, a myth from the darkest corners of Special Operations lore. A phantom medic who was said to have the devil's own luck and an angel's touch. A man who could walk through fire and bring back the wounded. "Task Force Nomad," the general continued, his voice resonating with history. "Classified. They were sent to places that weren't on any map, to fight battles that were never declared. Their casualty rates were astronomical, but they had an edge. They had him." He looked directly at Brody, his eyes burning with intensity. "Let me tell you a story, officer. At the siege of Hill 734, a position was overrun. 24 of our best men were cut off, wounded, and surrounded by an enemy force 10 times their size. Air support couldn't get in. A relief column was hours away. It was a death sentence. The order was given to write them off." The general paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But Sergeant Finch refused the order. He said, "Not on my watch." Armed with nothing but this medical kit and 2 canteens of water, he crawled for half a mile through an active minefield, under constant sniper and mortar fire. He didn't do it to attack. He did it to save his brothers. He gestured to Samuel, who was now slowly getting to his feet, assisted by Nurse Diaz. For 36 hours, in the heart of that hell, he moved from man to man, patching them up, keeping them alive with the tools in this pouch and sheer force of will. When the relief force finally broke through, they found him collapsed from exhaustion, shielding the body of a young private with his own, having saved 22 of the 24 men. He had been shot twice and had shrapnel in his leg. He never reported his own injuries until every single one of his men was airlifted out. The general's voice cracked with emotion. He didn't get a medal for it. He got a quiet thank you from a man in a suit and a threat to never speak of what happened. For the sake of national security, that's the price of being a ghost. That's the burden of being a guardian. He turned back to Brody, whose face had gone from red to a sickly, pale white. The young guard was trembling, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. The badge on his chest suddenly felt impossibly heavy. He looked at the old man, at Samuel, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the strength in those clear blue eyes, the history etched into the lines on his face, the profound dignity in his posture. He wasn't seeing a homeless man. He was seeing a giant. I didn't know, sir," Brody stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. General Wallace held up a hand, silencing him. He then turned to Samuel and extended his own hand. "Sergeant Finch, it is the greatest honor of my career to finally meet you. My first commanding officer, Colonel Jefferson, was one of the men you saved on that hill. He told me that story on his deathbed. He said if I ever saw a man with a serpent and staff tattoo carrying a leather pouch like this, I was to salute him." With that, the 4-star general, in front of the entire lobby, drew himself to attention. He raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It was a gesture of such profound respect that it brought tears to the eyes of the other veterans watching. One by one, they too got to their feet. An old Marine with a prosthetic leg pushed himself up, wincing, and saluted. A young woman in an Air Force sweatshirt stood and placed her hand over her heart. Soon, the entire lobby was standing in silent, reverent tribute. Samuel looked at them all, a gentle, weary wisdom in his eyes. He slowly raised a hand, not in a salute, but in a simple gesture of acknowledgement, of gratitude. He then looked at the ashamed young officer. Brody couldn't meet his gaze, staring instead at his own polished shoes as if they held the answers to the universe. "It's all right, son," Samuel said, his voice soft but clear. The entire room strained to hear him. "You were doing your job, but you need to learn to see, really see." He gestured with a gnarled hand from Brody's crisp uniform to his own worn jacket. The uniform doesn't make the man makes the uniform. Sometimes, the greatest battles leave no visible medals, only scars on the soul. General Wallace put a supportive arm around Samuel's shoulder. "What do you need, Sergeant? Anything. A house, a car, a lifetime supply of whatever you want. You name it, it's yours." Samuel Finch smiled that slow, gentle smile again. "I'm all right, General. I was just feeling a bit cold. I was waiting for the crosstown bus. My granddaughter is having her first baby. I was hoping to get there to meet him." The general's expression softened. "Well, you're not taking the bus today, my friend." He turned to one of his aides. "Get my car. We're giving Sergeant Finch a ride, and contact the VA secretary directly. I want Sergeant Finch's housing, pension, and top-tier medical care sorted out before we get back. I don't care what you have to do. Make it happen." As the general and his aides began to escort Samuel toward the exit, treating him with the reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty, Samuel paused and looked back at Officer Brody. The young man was still, frozen in place, a statue of shame. Samuel walked back to him. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Brody's shoulder. The young man flinched, but didn't pull away. "You're young," Samuel said quietly. "You have time to learn. Don't judge a book by its cover. You never know what stories are written inside." With a final, forgiving pat, he turned and walked away, a quiet hero leaving behind a lesson that would echo in that lobby and in that young officer's heart for the rest of his life. Brody watched him go. The image of the unassuming old man being treated like a king by a 4-star general burned into his memory. He finally understood. True strength wasn't in a loud voice or a pressed uniform. It was in the quiet dignity of a life lived in service, in the silent courage of a guardian who walked in the shadows so that others could live in the light. We live in a world that moves so fast, a world that often judges people in an instant based on what they wear or how old they look. But heroes don't always wear capes, and they certainly don't always wear uniforms. They are the quiet ones, the humble souls who walk among us carrying the weight of a history we can't possibly comprehend. The story of Samuel Finch reminds us to look deeper, to listen closer, and to treat everyone, especially our elders, with the respect and dignity they have earned 1,000 times over. You never know when you might be standing in the presence of a legend. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that honor the unsung heroes who live all around us.